Napoleon Bonaparte rose from a small island in the Mediterranean to command the greatest armies Europe had ever seen. For nearly 2 decades, he shaped the fate of nations through intellect, speed, and relentless ambition. Kings fell before him, empires collapsed. But in the end, one man, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, stood against him and delivered the final blow. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, soon after it became part of France. His family was minor nobility with little wealth. At military school in France, he was an outsider, mocked for his accent, but unmatched in his focus and intelligence. He trained as an artillery officer, mastering mathematics and tactics that would later change the art of war. The French Revolution opened doors that birth alone could never have offered. In a nation tearing down its monarchy, talent suddenly mattered more than title. Napoleon rose quickly. At 24, he helped recapture Toulon from royalist forces. In 1796, he led the French army in Italy, a campaign that would make him famous. Facing larger and better-equipped Austrian armies, Napoleon used speed, deception, and unity of movement to outfight them. In 1 year, he won more than a dozen major victories. France saw him as a genius, Europe as a threat. In 1799, he seized power in a coup and made himself first consul. 5 years later, in 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French at Notre Dame Cathedral. He did not wait for the Pope to place the crown. He lifted it himself, declaring that his destiny came from his own hands. Between 1805 and 1809, Napoleon dominated Europe. He destroyed the Austrians and Russians at Austerlitz, crushed Prussia at Jena, and forced every major continental power to submit or ally with him. His empire stretched from Spain to Poland. He introduced new legal codes, centralized government, modern education, and promoted merit over nobility. The Napoleonic Code still influences law today. But his greatest enemy was one he could never reach: Britain. Protected by the Royal Navy, Britain financed every coalition against him. To hurt them, Napoleon built the Continental System, a trade blockade against British goods. It failed, crippling his allies' economies and fueling resentment across Europe. Then came his fatal decision, the invasion of Russia in 1812. Over 600,000 soldiers marched east. The Russians refused battle, retreating deep into their own country and burning everything behind them. Napoleon entered Moscow, but the city was in flames. When winter struck, temperatures dropped below freezing. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion destroyed his army. Of the 600,000 who crossed into Russia, barely 100,000 survived. The catastrophe changed everything. In 1813, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain formed a new coalition. At Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. The following year, Paris fell. He abdicated and was exiled to the island of Elba. Yet the world hadn't seen the last of him. In February 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to France. Soldiers sent to arrest him joined him instead. "Vive l'Empereur!" they shouted. Within weeks, he ruled again. Europe prepared for war one final time. His enemies moved quickly. The British army, led by the Duke of Wellington, gathered in Belgium, joined by Prussian forces under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Napoleon planned to strike before they could unite, to defeat each separately, as he had done many times before. On June 16, 1815, Napoleon defeated part of the Prussian army at Ligny, but his second force failed to stop Blücher from retreating in good order. 2 days later, near a small Belgian village called Waterloo, the final battle began. The night before, rain had poured across the fields, turning them to mud. Napoleon delayed his attack, waiting for the ground to dry, a few crucial hours that would change history. At 11 a.m., his cannon opened fire on Wellington's army, positioned along a low ridge. The fighting was brutal. French infantry stormed the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte. Cavalry charged repeatedly. Wellington's men stood firm. The Duke moved calmly through the lines, encouraging his soldiers with the simple words, "Stand fast." All day, the battle hung in balance. Then, in the late afternoon, black columns appeared on the horizon. It was Blücher's Prussian army, marching to the field. Napoleon's right flank came under sudden attack. Desperate, he ordered his Imperial Guard, his last reserve, to strike at the center of Wellington's line. The Guard advanced through smoke and fire, but Wellington's troops held their ground. When the French hesitated, the Duke gave his order. "Now, gentlemen, now is your time." The British surged forward. The Guard broke. Panic spread. Napoleon's army collapsed. The Emperor had lost. 4 days later, he abdicated again. This time, there would be no escape. The British exiled him to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. There, far from Europe, Napoleon lived out his final years dictating his memoirs, reflecting on his victories and mistakes. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, outlived him by more than 30 years. He became Prime Minister of Britain and was celebrated across Europe as the man who defeated Napoleon. Yet even Wellington himself later said that facing Napoleon was unlike any other experience, that his presence on a battlefield was worth an entire army. Napoleon reshaped Europe, modernized nations, and changed the course of history. But in the end, the man who had defeated every king, every army, and every empire finally met his match. In the fields of Waterloo, against a calm, disciplined soldier named Arthur Wellesley. No one could defeat Napoleon except him, the Duke of Wellington, with Blücher at his side.